Hazard pay is back on, baby. Hazard pay is in the third stimulus package. But how will Joe Biden handle it? In 2020, the HEROES Act from Nancy Pelosi said $10,000 for a hazard pay applicant, up to $10,000. If you worked during the pandemic, $13 an hour, times the number of hours you worked from January to 60 days after the pandemic ended. Yes, that's January of last year to 60 days after this pandemic ends later this year. It's a lot of money. So will they use hazard pay as the same numbers? Will they keep essential workers defined the same way, like they include Uber and Lyft, and warehouse and construction workers, or will they narrow the qualifications and change the numbers? In this Overnight's LALATE video, I explain how to get hazard pay, who are essential workers, how to calculate the amount, and how simple but also detailed it is. Enjoy this Overnight's LALATE video about hazard pay. The hope for hazard pay continues as a second stimulus check debate heats up. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Afternoons with LALATE. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you are good and safe. This is our second of 4 videos in our afternoon session that starts with the check, goes to hazard pay, then FPUC, and finally entering with renter's assistance. Big developments today across the board, mostly economic and all related to hazard pay. But as you've seen the collective discourse this week, there seems to be a repeating occurrence. And what is that? No one's mentioning hazard pay. Viewers of this have dropped in the comments, and I've seen them overnight, that they keep on saying, LALATE, you're the only one that's talking about hazard pay. It's in the Democrats' bill. It's in the Democrats' bill. It's not in the Republicans' bill. But every time the Democrats appear before news or issue a news statement or appear on the congressional floor and argue the second stimulus package, they never use 2 words, hazard pay. It doesn't make one feel comfortable that the people who are essential workers of this country, who are owed the hazard pay, that worked during the pandemic, that risked their lives, are sitting back and not hearing their elected officials ever mention them. Let me give you the latest update. Nancy Pelosi's out of town. As you know, she's in Atlanta for the wonderful, incredible service for Representative Lewis. But negotiations which were including her and Chuck Schumer for the Democrats and Steve Mnuchin and the chief of staff of the White House, Mark Meadows, whose name I always forget, have been derailed because she's simply out of town. Of course, that's a nice, polite excuse because Nancy will be back in town this evening. The negotiations off the track, but the showmanship is now continuing. Today, 2 people from both sides of the political aisle introduced their bills to the floor to have it for a vote. No one voted for it either. Where are we going with this? It appears that Steve Mnuchin's self-manufactured or showmanship or grandstanding promise that a second stimulus package would be approved tomorrow seems about as likely as pigs are flying over this recording within the next 5 minutes. It's not happening. But what's happening with hazard pay? Well, here's the good news, and this is very, very promising news. We all know hazard pay is in the Democrat bill. We also know it's not coming out of the Democrats' bill. The Republicans are doing everything in their manner and shape and means to do things little by little. Let's do a bill for this, let's do a bill for that. Nancy and Chuck have been irate about that and said, no, we are not piecemealing anything. It's either a whole bill or no bill. That ultimately helps the potential of hazard pay from getting passed. What's going on? The Republicans, including that charming guy from Kentucky, minutes ago said, you know what, we have a couple problems. We have a problem of unemployment, unemployment FPUC, which, the Democrats and the Republicans both caused by going on vacation. And we have a problem of eviction moratoriums. Yes, this is McConnell saying this, whose own bill doesn't have an eviction moratorium protection in there. He says, we need separate bills passed right now. Well, Nancy and Chuck, whose bill has hazard pay in there, says, no, we're not going to do little separate bills. We're doing a whole bill. which, by the way, has hazard pay in there. They don't mention that when they say it, but it does. So ultimately, the hope for hazard pay stands with the grounds that the Democrats don't want to chop away at their bill so it looks like Swiss cheese at the end. They want to have it as one complete whole that includes hazard pay. Now, the mixed messages continue from the White House, which have said nothing about essential workers, that have said nothing about helping people on the front lines, and have really focused their attention this week, especially when it's Donald Trump, on talking about stuff other than second stimulus check or stimulus package or hazard pay. The president spent time talking about voter fraud, canceling the election, mail-in ballots, and suburban America. And rather than talk about what's an issue this week and next week, he's talking about everything else. So where is the focus? Ultimately, it looks like both sides are scatterbrains at the moment. The Republicans clearly don't understand what's in their bill, talking about protecting American citizens from evictions, but they don't have evictions in their bill. The president today said he maybe wants to give you more than $1,200 when he's giving you less than $1,200. His bill says $500 for dependents, not $1,200. It seems like people are just chatting their butts off and have no idea what they've actually written. But the issue that's a core for you right now is that only one group has written anything for hazard pay. Now, the new economic data released minutes ago is really not promising. It talks about GDP, which I detail on Mornings with LALATE, and boy, the numbers are not good. 30% of the U.S. economy disappeared for purposes of GDP numbers, sank by 30% because of the pandemic. The worst drop since the recession. Not the recession, the Great Depression of the 1920s. Unemployment numbers are out today as well. I mean, you know where this is going. Jobless claims, which I've done every single week. We're at week 19, 19th consecutive week of unemployment claims, new unemployment claims. Just this week, over 1.4 million new people on jobless claims. The situation's serious, folks, and yet no progress by this group. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, says it feels like we got about half of the GDP we lost in Q2 back in Q3. This is going to be slog until this pandemic's over. Even then, I don't think we'll be at full employment until 2024. It's not going to be easy. What is he talking about? Well, a new report out from RBC Capital Markets and Fact Sheet says that there's so much unemployment, that there's so much dire situations across the board economically, whether including essential workers or not including essential workers, that this American economy may not be back to normal for over a decade. That we're not throwing enough stimulus on the fire, and that we're literally dripping things little by little, and it's not going to work. Indeed, while there was some progress in today's number, the drop of GDP is something we have never seen. The Fed, of course, overnight is trying to really step in. Their move is not to really help, again, essential workers, but to hope this economy can stay above waterline. The Fed dropped interest rates to basically zero, the first time we've seen anything during this pandemic, but that's a little bit too late. My fear is we're going to be creating the conditions that we observed in the 1930s, where fiscal fatigue caused a series of policy errors that deepened and broadened and lengthened the Great Depression. This is a new quote by the head of RKM's economic group. What are we talking about here? We're talking about when we're looking at hazard pay, when we're looking at essential workers who are in the grocery stores and the pharmacies, who are shippers and distributors, who are in the warehouses, who are frontline people, who are working the tarmacs at the airlines, who are working the post office. When no one is doing anything to protect them and is doing everything to hurt them, how will the economy survive? Now, when we're talking about hazard pay and we're talking about essential workers, you understand what we're talking about. These are generally people who had worked during the pandemic at one point. They don't have to be working still now. You could have been laid off and you're entitled to hazard pay. But these are people who had jobs at some point during this pandemic. And yet, half of this country is not supporting giving you a single penny. Now, that's from a political standpoint, the political party. How about the corporations? The corporations now are doing very little, if nothing, to protect you as well. More and more corporations daily are indicating they're not going to be paying hazard pay going forward. They won't use the word hazard pay. They'll refer to it as a bonus pay to, somehow say it's not a hazardous environment. We're just giving you a bonus. Okay, I get the point you're doing. And then there's companies, like airlines who, boy, working the tarmac at an airline during a pandemic, or working as a stewardess or flight attendant on a plane during a pandemic is an essential job. It's absolutely defined in the bill as an essential job. Or, working at Boeing and working on futzing with the plane. I'm not a plane guy, so I don't know what the term is. Playing with the propeller, that's all essential work. What are we doing with this? Well, the first round, the Republicans and Democrats gave airlines hundreds of billions of dollars so that they would save jobs. And what did they do? They fired people. Tens of thousands of jobs have been lost for the airline industry with money that was given to them, not as PPP money, but a separate part of the CARES Act just for airlines. Now in the fall, the airlines are back asking for more money. But is it to go to their essential workers, the workers that are entitled to hazard pay? No. In fact, some representatives are so irate about it, they're saying, how dare you employ people in a hazard pay environment the first time around, and you not only don't pay them hazard pay, but you lay them off with money that we gave to you to ensure that you kept them on staff, and you have the audacity to come back to us now in August and do the same thing? Well, guess who wants to give them money? The Republicans. It's that type of confusion about what's going on here. The Republicans are also proposing not hazard pay, but money for restaurant owners. They want to have a deduction that would allow anyone who visits a restaurant to write off as a full 100% tax deduction all the way through December of this year. Who does that help? It helps restaurant owners. Does it help restaurant owners keep people on unemployment? No. Restaurant employers could, fire 85% of their staff and keep, 20% of the employers, but get a lot of business because of a great deduction. There's even more. The federal government wants to give a billion-dollar building to the FBI that could house state employees and other civil servants. Well, are those state employees going to get hazard pay? No. And then there's Mr. McConnell, whose moral compass is always pointed, towards hell. Did I say that? Yeah, I did say that. He literally wants to ensure that you cannot sue an employer. And I got to tell you, I looked more at that liability bill. It's crazy. He doesn't want to. He wants to ensure that you cannot sue a property owner, a business owner, a doctor, or anyone for anything that happens because of the pandemic, unless it's an intentional act. But he doesn't want to give you hazard pay. So what will happen? Well, we will see. Ultimately, the negotiations were supposed to come to a fruition tomorrow, was the promise that Steve Mnuchin said, okay, Stevie, I don't buy you. I don't buy that tale. The spirit and the core of this channel remains the same. I feel for the essential workers. I see what's happening. And if you don't see what's happening, please be on alert. Teachers in Florida are now vowing to strike. They're saying, don't order me to go back to work in schools. We will go on strike. We're essential workers. You're not providing us hazard pay. You're not providing us a safe environment. That situation is going to snowball. It's going to snowball. You're going to see mass protests, my prediction, from grocery union employees and more as the pandemic spreads and there is no relief provided to those essential workers. Ultimately, my job is to keep you informed and educated, inspired, and motivated. A lot of big news today and a lot of progress otherwise across the board. Coming up later today on Afternoons with LALATE is FPUC and a big update about eviction moratoriums. As always, stay with LALATE for more.